I didn't wake up one morning thinking, today, I'm going to shake things up. It wasn't some grand plan or a moment of madness. It was more like a subtle shift in my perspective, something that grew slowly over time, like a crack in a mirror, that gradually spreads until you can no longer ignore it. I've been with Dan for almost 6 years. We met in college, got married a year later, and for the most part, things were good. Comfortable. But there's something about comfort that can make you question whether you're truly living or just existing. We were in a good place, stable jobs, a cozy apartment, a predictable routine, the kind of life people envy from the outside. But for me, it had started to feel a little flat. I wasn't unhappy, not exactly. It was more like I was craving something. Something more than what I was getting. Maybe it was the monotony. Maybe it was the feeling that I had become a version of myself that didn't surprise anyone, least of all Dan. He had his own life, his own work, his own set of friends. And me? I was just there, keeping things running, but not really feeling like I was alive in the way I wanted to be. I told myself it was a phase. Everyone goes through slumps in their relationships, but it kept gnawing at me. One night, after a long week of work, I was scrolling through social media, and I saw a post from a friend who had just returned from a spontaneous weekend trip. No plans, no expectations, just pure freedom. It made me stop for a second. How long had it been since I did something spontaneous? Something just for me. That's when it hit me. What if I tried something? Just to see what it felt like. Nothing too extreme, just different. What if I stepped out of my comfort zone, crossed a line, and saw where it took me? I was curious, but more than that, I was searching for something. Maybe it wasn't even about finding it with someone else. Maybe it was about finding myself again. I know this sounds crazy, and I'll be the first to admit it. I didn't think it through the way I should have. But at that moment, it felt like an experiment. A chance to explore a side of myself that I had ignored for too long. The next weekend, Dan had a work thing. Something that kept him away for the entire Saturday. I found myself alone, with too much time to think. I ended up at a local bar. Nothing fancy. Just a place to have a drink and relax. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to be out of the house, to feel like I was doing something. Then, there he was. I can still remember how it felt. A stranger, someone I'd never seen before, striking up a conversation. It was light at first, casual. The kind of small talk you have with anyone when you're just passing the time. But then the conversation started to shift. We talked about our lives, our goals, our disappointments. There was a kind of connection there, unexpected and brief, like we were both willing to show each other parts of ourselves we usually kept hidden. I didn't expect it to go any further. But when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner, I found myself saying yes. I told myself it was just a dinner, just some conversation. But the truth was, I was excited. Thrilled, even. I hadn't felt that way in a long time. We ate, we talked, and the more I learned about him, the more I realized how different this felt from the life I had with Dan. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made me question everything I had taken for granted. At the end of the night, he walked me back to my car. I didn't expect anything to happen. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. But when he kissed me, lightly, but enough to make me feel something, I didn't pull away. For a second, I stood there, frozen. This wasn't me. I didn't do this. I wasn't someone who stepped out of line. But in that moment, I felt like I was someone else. Someone alive, someone who wasn't bound by routines or expectations. I let myself feel that thrill of being wanted, of being in control of something for once. It was like I was tasting something forbidden, and I couldn't get enough. The next morning, I woke up and the weight of what had happened crashed down on me. I felt guilty, confused. But a part of me, some small, rebellious part, didn't regret it. The experiment had worked. I had stepped outside my life and felt something raw. Something real. But that feeling of exhilaration didn't last long. It wasn't long before I started to wonder what it meant for me, for my marriage. Could I really go back to the way things were with Dan? Would I be able to pretend that nothing had changed? I didn't know how to face him. The man I had loved, the man who trusted me completely. How could I explain what had happened? Would he even understand? But one thing was clear, I had crossed a line, and now, there was no going back. The days after that night were a blur. I could barely focus on anything at work, and the weight of my actions kept pressing on my chest like a stone. I kept replaying the events over and over in my head, trying to figure out what I had really wanted. Was it just the thrill? The escape? Or was there something deeper? something I wasn't willing to admit even to myself. I didn't tell anyone, of course. I didn't even tell my best friend, Laura, who usually knew everything about me. There was no way I could explain it, not without sounding insane. How could I justify doing something so reckless, so out of character? I wasn't that kind of person. Or at least, I thought I wasn't. Then, on Thursday evening, Dan came home early. I wasn't expecting it, and at first, I thought it was a pleasant surprise. He walked through the door, his usual tired smile on his face, but there was something in his eyes, something that felt different. "Hey, babe," he said, setting his bag down. "I didn't expect to be home this early, but they let us go. How was your day?" I froze, trying to mask the nervous energy that was suddenly coursing through my veins. I hadn't prepared for this. I hadn't thought about how I would face him, how I would look him in the eyes without feeling the weight of what I had done. It was fine," I said, trying to sound casual, just the usual. I turned away to make dinner, anything to distract myself from the rising tide of guilt. I didn't know how to face him, didn't know how to even begin to talk about what had happened. Dan didn't seem to notice. Or at least, he didn't say anything. He settled into his usual spot on the couch, flicking on the TV. It was almost as if nothing had changed, and that terrified me more than anything. What if he didn't know? What if I had gotten away with it? Would I just go back to pretending everything was normal, as if nothing had shifted beneath the surface? I wasn't sure I could. The guilt was overwhelming, gnawing at me from the inside out. I felt like a fraud, like I was wearing a mask that was starting to crack. I couldn't keep this secret forever. At some point, it would come out. And when it did, I didn't know how it would change everything. But then something unexpected happened. As I was setting the table, Dan turned to me. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. "We haven't had much time together lately. I miss us, you know. Just us. I know work's been crazy, but I want to spend more time with you. Maybe we could go away for the weekend, just the two of us. What do you think?" I froze. The suggestion hit me like a ton of bricks. The last thing I wanted to do was go away with him, to pretend like everything was fine when I felt so far from it. But I couldn't exactly tell him why, could I? I forced a smile, trying to hide the turmoil inside. "Yeah, that sounds great. I think we could use a little getaway." He smiled back, looking relieved. He probably thought I was on board with the idea. But I wasn't. Not really. That night, as we got into bed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I would ever be able to get past this. I didn't want to lie to him, but I also didn't want to destroy everything we had. He trusted me, he believed in me. How could I betray that? I turned onto my side, facing away from him, my back rigid with tension. I could hear his breathing, steady and calm, and for a moment, I felt like I was in a different world. One where everything was fine, where the last few days hadn't happened. That it didn't last. The guilt crept back in, like a shadow I couldn't escape. The next few days felt like I was walking on eggshells. We went through the motions. Work, meals, casual conversation. But everything felt different. I felt like I was living a double life. And every time I looked at Dan, I could see the person I used to be. The woman who would never dream of doing something like this. But now, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The person I used to be felt like a stranger. It wasn't just guilt that weighed me down. It was fear. Fear that I had made a mistake I couldn't undo. Fear that the bond we had built over the years would break, irreparably, because of one impulsive decision. By the time the weekend getaway arrived, I was barely holding it together. Dan was excited, packing our bags, making plans, and I could see how much he wanted this. Wanted us. To work. I didn't want to ruin it, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in a house of cards, one gust of wind away from everything collapsing. We drove out of the city that Friday afternoon, heading to a quiet little cabin in the woods. The fresh air was nice, and the scenery was beautiful, but the whole time, I felt like I was carrying a secret that was too heavy to keep inside. Dan was in his usual upbeat mood, talking about work and future plans, and I tried to listen, tried to engage, but my mind kept drifting to him. To that night. To what it all meant. The weekend felt like a blur, like I was watching myself from the outside, playing a part in a story I didn't know how to finish. By the time we returned home, I was more confused than ever. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation, but I had no idea how to start it. How do you tell someone you love that you've crossed a line you can't uncross? How do you explain something you don't even fully understand yourself? I had hoped that the weekend away would give me some clarity. But all it did was make everything worse. Dan had been so... Dan. He was loving, caring, attentive. He was the man I married. The man I thought I still knew. But every time I looked at him, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling of what I had done, what I had felt, and the secret I was carrying. It was suffocating. By the time we got back home, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The guilt was unbearable, and the fear of him finding out on his own was worse than anything. I had to face it. I had to tell him, even if it meant losing everything. Even if it meant destroying the life we had built. It was that Thursday night, after dinner, when it happened. Dan was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I could hear the soft hum of the TV, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. My mind was racing. How would he react? What would I say? I felt sick to my stomach just thinking about it. Dan, I said, my voice shaky, almost a whisper. He looked up from his phone, his brow furrowing in concern. What's wrong? You look off. I swallowed hard. I need to talk to you about something. Something important. His expression softened. Okay, what is it? I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The words didn't come easily. I had rehearsed them in my head 1,000 times, but now that the moment was here, I couldn't seem to make them stick. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I did something. I made a mistake, and I need to be honest with you. Dan sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing as if he could sense where this was going. What do you mean? What's going on, babe? I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering the courage to speak. I was with someone else. I said quietly, the words barely escaping my lips. I slept with another man. I didn't plan for it to happen. It wasn't about you or anything you did. It was me, something I thought I needed to do. And I regret it. So much. The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't look at him. My hands were trembling in my lap, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I could feel the tears starting to form, but I fought them back. I needed to stay strong. For whatever reason, I needed him to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Dan didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. The seconds stretched on, thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I expected, almost too calm. Why? He asked. His eyes were searching mine, as though he was trying to find some explanation, some reason behind what I had done. I don't know. I whispered. I guess? I don't know. I felt like I needed to feel something again, something real, something outside of everything we've built, outside of our life. I thought I could get away with it. I thought it was just a mistake that wouldn't mean anything. But it does. It does mean something. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to hurt you. Dan leaned back against the couch, rubbing his temples with his fingers. You slept with someone else. Just like that. How could you do that, Jess? How could you go that far? After everything we've been through. The pain in his voice cut through me like a knife. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry in the way I thought he might be. He was just hurt, deeply, utterly hurt. And it was the kind of pain that I knew I had caused, and it was breaking me. I'm sorry. I whispered, the words feeling hollow, but I said them anyway. I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't make sense. I didn't think it through. I didn't think about you or how it would affect us. I was just selfish. Dan's eyes were filled with confusion, frustration, and something I couldn't quite read, maybe disbelief. You think saying sorry is enough? You think that's gonna fix this? I don't even know who you are right now, Jess. I don't know what to think. How do I trust you again? How do I know this won't happen again? His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had always thought that honesty would set things right, but now I was realizing just how much damage had already been done. My decision had fractured something between us, and I didn't know how to repair it. I didn't even know if it could be repaired. I don't have an answer for you, Dan. I said, my voice breaking. I wish I did. I don't know what's gonna happen now. But I want to make things right. I want to fix this, if you'll let me. I don't want to lose you. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes filled with pain and frustration. Then he shook his head. I don't know, Jess. I don't know if I can just forgive you. This isn't something you can just fix with a few words. You've changed something between us, and I don't know how to get it back. I felt my heart shatter in my chest. He wasn't yelling at me, he wasn't calling me names, but his words were worse than any of that. The trust we'd built, the connection we'd shared. It felt like it was slipping away, and it was my fault. I'm sorry. I said again, more quietly this time. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know it's not that simple. I just wanted you to know the truth. That's all. Dan stood up abruptly, pacing around the room. I could see his mind racing, and I knew there was nothing I could say to make it better. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I don't know if I can forgive you, Jess, he said, stopping to look at me. I need time. And I need to think. I don't even know if we can go back to the way things were. I need to figure out if I can trust you again. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. And with that, he left the room, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of my actions. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I had shattered something precious. And now, I would have to live with the consequences. The next few days were an agonizing blur. Dan was distant, colder than I'd ever seen him before. He spent most of his time in the study, working late into the night or retreating into the silence of his own thoughts. I had given him space, as he'd asked, but every minute felt like a lifetime. Every glance, every word between us seemed weighed down by the gravity of what I had done. It wasn't that he was ignoring me, but I could tell he was trying to process what had happened, trying to figure out how to move forward. And, honestly, I didn't blame him. I had shattered everything. The bond, the trust, the connection we had worked so hard to build. It was all gone in a single moment of weakness. And no amount of apologies would fix that. I spent most of my days replaying the conversation over and over in my head. The look in Dan's eyes, the way his voice had cracked when he told me he didn't know if he could forgive me. I couldn't stop thinking about how much pain I had caused him, how much damage I had done. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the confusion, the hurt, and it was all my fault. But what did I expect? That everything would go back to normal just because I was sorry, that he would magically forget what I had done because I wanted to fix things. No, I had betrayed his trust, and trust wasn't something you could repair with just words. One night, after dinner, Dan finally broke the silence. He looked tired, his eyes hollow, but there was something different in his expression. Something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was resignation. Or maybe it was just the weight of the decision he had to make. Jess, he began, his voice low and steady. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what happened. And I don't know where to go from here. I don't know if I can just forget it. I don't know if I can just move on. But I also don't know if I want to throw everything away. I didn't know what to say. There were no words that could make this better. No apology that would erase the betrayal. So, I just sat there listening, my heart pounding in my chest. I love you? Dan continued, looking at me with such intensity that it almost hurt. I always have. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to give up on us. But trust is broken now. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can. I need time. I need a lot of time. I understand, I said softly, my voice cracking. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know it's going to take time. I'll give you all the time you need. We both sat in silence after that. The air between us was thick with unspoken emotions, things we both knew but couldn't articulate. The truth was, I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, either. I wasn't sure if we'd make it through this. And the uncertainty, the doubt, was almost more painful than anything else. The following weeks were strained. Dan and I barely spoke except for the necessities. We were living in the same house, sharing the same space, but it felt like we were two strangers, each carrying the weight of the same painful memory. I still tried to show him that I was committed to making things right, that I wasn't the person I had become that night. But it felt like he was slipping further away with each passing day. Every time I reached out, every time I tried to bridge the gap, he pulled back. It wasn't that he was being cruel, but it was clear that he was protecting himself. He had closed off emotionally, building walls that I couldn't break through. And I didn't know how to fix it. How could I, when I was the one who had broken everything in the first place? One afternoon, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I had been checking my messages for the 10th time, hoping to see something from Dan, a sign that he was ready to talk, that we could try to move forward. But there was nothing. No text, no call, just silence. I realized then that the silence wasn't just Dan pulling away, it was also me. I had isolated myself. I had stopped talking to anyone about what happened, afraid of the judgment, afraid of people seeing me as the person I didn't want to be. But this wasn't just between Dan and me anymore. It was bigger than that. It was about me confronting the truth of my actions and what I had become. I had made a choice. A choice I couldn't undo, and now I had to live with the consequences. I thought about calling Laura, telling her everything. I hadn't told her a single thing about what had happened, and I had carried the weight of that secret for far too long. But the truth was, I was scared. Scared of what she would think, scared of how I would be judged, scared of the answers I might get. Instead, I decided to face Dan. I couldn't fix things from a distance. I needed to do what I should have done from the beginnings: confront the pain, acknowledge the brokenness, and take responsibility for what I had done. That night, when Dan came home, I was waiting for him. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I had to say something. As he walked through the door, I stood up, my heart racing. "Dan, we need to talk?" I said quietly. "I need to understand what happens now. What happens to us? I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I'm sorry for what I did. I can't take it back, but I can promise you that I'm ready to do whatever it takes to fix this. I don't want to lose you." Dan didn't answer right away. He stood there, looking at me for a long time. Then he shook his head slowly, his eyes tired but not angry. "I don't know what the future holds, Jess. I don't know if we can go back to the way things were. But I'm not ready to give up on us. Not yet." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. There was no easy solution, no quick fix. But there was still a possibility, a chance, however small, that we could rebuild what I had broken. And that, I realized, was the hardest part. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was accepting that healing takes time, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. We had a long road ahead of us, and I didn't know where it would lead. But at least we were still talking. At least we were still trying. And that, somehow, felt like enough.